If you're watching this video having seen all the reviews of the first 3 Forza Motorsport games, I think you already get a clear idea of what I think of them. They're brilliant sim races, all the ones I've looked at up to this point, not much criticism, and the popularity of the series increased every passing title, taking advantage of Polyphony Digital taking their sweet time on Gran Turismo 5. So it was no surprise when just 9 months after the release of Forza Motorsport 3, Turn 10 announced at E3 that Forza Motorsport 4 was being released late 2011, with their presentation showcasing how the also upcoming Kinect was utilized, although I reckon they only did this because they were forced to do so by Microsoft to help its chances commercially. Does anyone still remember it? But the biggest news was in September, when Microsoft announced a partnership with BBC's Top Gear at the height of its popularity. Their first use was the Stig's Garage Pack DLC for Forza Motorsport 3, but the follow-up had plans to include more than that. Things like cars that are featured in a number of challenges on the show, including the reasonably priced models the stars drove, the test track in Donsvold, and an Auto Vista mode full of cars reviewed by presenter Jeremy Clarkson. Furthermore, there was a teaser trailer featuring Clarkson calling petrolheads an endangered species, which if you love cars is surprisingly emotional. They wanted to prove that they weren't just relying on Top Gear as a popular gimmick to help sell the game, it was ready to enhance the overall experience.
It was the sense that you'd had a furiously spinning washing machine full of bricks hammering directly into your most sensitive pain receptors.
Forza Motorsport 4 was released on November 2011, and despite being the third title on the Xbox 360, honestly it baffles me how Turn 10 do that, given that it took Polyphony Digital 5 years to make GT5. This one is widely considered to be peak Forza, even over the Horizon titles. And with the series still a priority for Xbox, does it still hold that distinction? Small disclaimer, I was worried after the second disc of my copy of Forza Motorsport 3 didn't work that I was going to go through the same thing again. Fortunately, it works like a champ, so I have everything the game has to offer this time, so I won't feel as restricted.
There is a haven. A place that celebrates speed, grit, gears, and fun. And it's all here for you to explore.
The way the career mode is set up is very similar to Forza Motorsport 3. The first thing you do is enter a tutorial race with the car on the game's cover, the Ferrari 458 Italia. Select your first model, aka the slowest the game has to offer, even more so than the last game. Then enter what's called the World Tour, which replaces the season mode that is pretty similar, in which you have 3 event types to choose from, and they randomize every time you complete one based on the cars you currently have in your garage. And it tries to diversify the cars and tracks you race on. But instead of a few races in one championship, the game sends you all over the world to compete in one race of that event a certain number of times before unlocking another series, similar to the career mode in the touring car race driver games. It's structured this way so you can theoretically reach the end of the game faster than the traditional way, in terms of driving all the different types of cars and tracks, but still lets you go back to anything you missed and complete them via event lists. It's a way of saying this game will choose for you, but you can choose yourself. I actually prefer the World Tour format because I get to drive different cars in different events, but progresses like a racing series. Basically a plane ticket with unlimited use until your racing career is over, as a Forza game should. And you also get a 25% bonus in credits racing through this format. Keep in mind the events you select from the World Tour can also be randomized based on the current car you've selected. However, if you find yourself selecting between more than one event with identical restrictions, my advice is to not go for the one with the random bonus, because it seems like every time I'm rewarded with the worst out of the randomized. The event variety, or as Jeremy Clarkson calls them, a number of challenges, has increased too, including car football, knocking over as many bowling pins as you can, a downhill sprint with slower oncoming traffic, overtake as many cars as possible, and driving between the cones, which feel like they were taken straight out of Project Gotham Racing. But I suppose if Bizarre Creations couldn't make those games anymore, it makes sense for Turn 10 to incorporate it into their Forza titles. Don't forget that I didn't install disc 2 of the third game when I reviewed it, so there might be a few I missed in that one. But point is, there's plenty of variety in the events, or at least more than I expected. And when it comes to the new circuits, they picked a few really good ones, including obviously the Top Gear test track, Hockenheim Ring, Indianapolis, Sonoma, and created the fictional Burmese Alps. Although if you peel away the Alps, it's just another maple leaf. Still, I feel with the fictional circuits like these being made for the last couple of games, games, where they look like they're set in places where these tracks would never exist in real life. You can see the seeds planted for the Forza Horizon series. However, maybe it's because I reviewed Shift 2 Unleashed recently, but I was hoping for more than that. Maybe a classic version of the tracks already on here, like Silverstone, Hockenheim, or Suzuka, and with the number of racing games implementing night racing by that point, although there is a dusk and dawn setting which is used in events that have more than one heat, I'm surprised that this game hasn't followed suit. But when you only have 2 years to make a Forza title at the quality levels they do, it's hard to look completely different than the predecessor, especially back in 2009 when the third game was already considered the be-all of that generation. So all you can do is alter the quality touches even more. That's why on first impression, Forza 4 has a very similar style in terms of menu navigation, event types, cars, music. It feels like Forza Motorsport 3.5, and I'm kind of stretching for other things to say about it. But aside from the World Tour structure, when you pay attention to those little tweaks, they all eventually add up to make a noticeable difference. At least that's the impression I've got after researching this game, like when they worked on bringing some of these circuits to the virtual world to the tiniest of details. For example, when they went into Hockenheim to bring it into their video game, they scanned and photographed it as much as they could, including tire skids, roughness of the apexes, the quality of the seats in the grandstands. Looks like a circuit that's been used several times. I'm not saying other developers aren't going to those lengths, like if I ever re-review the Gran Turismo series in the future, I'll look further into how Polyphony made their games. I'm just pointing out that Turn 10 do, and you get a better understanding of why these games are so well received in the graphics department, and why it takes over a year for a certain team to design just one circuit. Forza games are a perfect showcase to illustrate the power of the Xbox 360. The fact that this game is nearly a decade old at the time of this video, now I know I said this in the Forza Motorsport 3 review, but I'm not sure we've moved that far ahead in graphics. I'll have to wait to see what Forza Horizon looks like, but this might be the best looking 360 exclusive, or at least the best looking running at a frame rate of 60 per second without any slowdown whatsoever. And when it comes to sound, they recorded engine noises from multiple positions, the engine, exhaust, tires. They altered how it changes based on the upgrades installed so it doesn't sound completely different. In fact, the noise volumes are different depending on the car, and for the Auto Vista mode, which I'm about to get to right now, they even recorded individual noises on a rolling road indoors specifically for this part for extra authenticity. Now, I thought this was going to be nothing more than a quick showroom description narrated by Jeremy Clarkson, which honestly sounds good enough, and I was never going to question the insane attention to detail put into these cars. But no, there's more to it. You can actually walk around and open all the doors, engine bays, hop inside, start the engine, as well as Clarkson's mini reviews of each one explained in a way you'd expect if he was on Top Gear or the Grand Tour.
Firing that up is like strapping a unicorn to the roof and driving around shouting, "Look at me!" through a loud hailer.
His opinion of certain cars kind of feel copied into the game using different words, but then again you can say the same thing about my reviews. You can tell he had a lot of fun describing these cars. He's very entertaining to listen to, and it definitely helps elevate this part of the game to a fun level. Honestly, him alone provides the humor of this clean, crisp, and serious presentation that's standard in a lot of sim races. And if you unlock all the cars here, you even get the Warthog from the Halo franchise, described by Jen Taylor, aka Cortana.
The rear section of the Warthog can be configured to any number of purposes, including troop transport and weapons platforms.
I know you can't actually drive it, but as a fan of Top Gear, Grand Tour, racing games, and Halo, the thought of Jeremy Clarkson and Cortana explaining how the Warthog works in a Forza game with the Halo theme playing in the background is one of the coolest things ever. Though I was surprised by the absence of Richard Hammond and James May. I would have thought they'd lend their voices to some of these car descriptions as well, or at least the little details like the engine, interior, or even just tips on how to play the game. I imagine May being suited for that sort of thing. Maybe the developers didn't want their presence to overshadow the Forza brand too much.
And if that hasn't put you off the Aero Supersports, you should know that there's also a version with a fixed roof, one of which is owned by Richard Hammond. the idiot.
Nonetheless, I was massively surprised by the Auto Vista mode. As you can tell from the Warthog, I spent a lot of time here and it's another great way to drive the very fast cars right away. So many wishlist options.
I have never driven a car that attracts more attention, and I drove this one a lot because I bought one as remarkably, at the time, there wasn't a Ferrari that was better. And that's only something that happens once every 50 years.
Unfortunately, the developers couldn't get the license to have Porsches in this game unless you get an expansion which came out half a year later. But despite this, every manufacturer clearly wanted to be part of the Forza franchise by that point because there is still over 100 cars more than its predecessor, all with their own interior view looking as polished as ever for 2011, with every type imaginable. Though I do wonder how many of them are actually new to this game, as opposed to just being a complete edition of Forza Motorsport 3. Well, I'll tell you what's new. The rate of cars driving into your garage has increased. Thanks to the World Tour format, experience points are earned faster. Every time you level up, you have multiple cars to choose from. And if you have a Forza Motorsport 3 profile that has reached at least level 25, you receive a few prize cars right from the get-go. Another reason to review a series in the correct order, I suppose. Nah, there are a lot of cars in this game, and what I like is how it balances the line between quantity and quality compared to other racing games. Lots of cars, but every single one of them made for the Xbox 360 with a lot of customization options. It's so easy to make anything in this game with over 1,000 layers of any color, nothing's delayed while editing, and if you have the skill and patience, you really can design anything. Do I have the patience? No, Forza Motorsport 4 would have to be in my top 5 games I played the most before that would happen, but I still did my best, using inspiration from already established race car liveries including an F1 and a couple of others. The only problem with customization in a game like this, because you're driving so many different cars, there's not much point in investing that time into the visuals of a car if you plan on using it for only a few races. From a reviewer perspective, I like to show as many different cars at once, and I have to know in advance that I'm going to drive this car in a lot of the races so I can show off the work I did visually. Yeah, I might not be as good as the pros, but I still enjoyed this part, probably more so than the predecessors, because while it doesn't actually improve that much from those games, it isn't any worse either. And I'm also starting to realize all the steps required to make something truly professional. I tried making one livery in Shift 2 Unleashed, for example. I gave up on that aspect completely because it doesn't understand the concept of smooth decal movement and menu shortcuts, and that makes a huge difference. Suddenly I'm reviewing this game next and it's like, that's much more like it. And there are more decal options, you can look at your car at any angle, and you can auction off your work for extra credits. Yeah, this is definitely better. I'm yet to discover whether the next generation of Forza titles have improved, but for now, I'm all praise for the visual side of customization here. It's one of the best. That and Midnight Club LA. They're the games you go to for visual customization of two different racing genres. Performance-wise, I never paid too much attention to this part since, like the predecessor, I only ever upgraded anything whenever the game suggested that I do so to keep up with the opponents, doing everything for me automatically. However, I did find myself selecting a car based on the circuit I was driving on, so if I was racing on something like Road America, I'd more likely choose the Bugatti Veyron, but for Mugello, a few extra corners, I'd choose a Mitsubishi Evo X. As is with sim races, you're always thinking like a race driver on the track, staying on the racing line, maintaining speeds after the corner. The latter seems to be my Achilles heel, as opponents always seem to get the upper hand on those tight corners. With all the racing games I played recently, this one feels like I'm driving on a cloud. It's a perfect way to describe the interior view as well. The steering barely moves and it doesn't look particularly exciting, with the only difference between this and Forza 3 is that you visibly change gears. But I suppose if you have hundreds of cars, it's hard to make them look like this at 60 frames per second. When you work with consoles, some things you have to compromise for better or worse, and this game goes for the cleaner look. I mean, that's not to say it doesn't provide any sense of speed. Just take a Veyron out on the Circuit de la Sarthe without the chicanes on the straight. You can literally reach 400 kilometers with that thing. It's great fun. If you're a fan of this series, then you know how much Dan Greenwald loves tire physics. Through another partnership with Pirelli, just kidding, I won't do that again, Pirelli, they were able to gather the kind of data that, yeah, I can't comprehend, but instead of blending all the work they previously did on the predecessor with the data Pirelli had, they wanted to know why their results differ from theirs, and try to match it since Pirelli are knowledgeable enough to supply the entire current F1 grid. The developers also created custom scenarios for tires with the anticipation of how a player will drive the car in a video game for that extra authenticity. It certainly doesn't play any worse, so I like it just as much, even if I notice how floaty the handling is. But it is important to get an understanding of how they gathered all that information to make it play the way it does. Now, the opponent AI are just as switched on as the predecessors. They'll react to where you are on the track, but you can still goad them into making a mistake. As you can see, I didn't touch the car and it went off the track like it missed a gear. Like all the predecessors, the difficulty settings you select affect the total earnings in a race, so the less driving aids turned on, the more difficult the handling is and the more you earn every race. However, new to this game is how it detects your driving style over time, and the opponent AI slowly adapts to it. Like they too have done their research, but on you as a driver. So based on the way you race and the more you win will change how opponents react. Judging from the way they're trying to overtake me, I must be a really bad driver. At first I hated it because of how sudden the difficulty curve was. I first found out when I went from driving a BMW 2002 Turbo to an Audi R8, and the opponents were seriously keeping up and taking crazy overtaking opportunities. And I was like, hang on a minute? Or this TVR pulling away from a Veyron like that. No way that would happen in real life, no matter what the difficulty. But when I did my research, it all made sense. And I also later found out there was no AI difficulty option in the career mode like the predecessors. Still, what a huge spike in the difficulty. And it certainly makes the Auto Vista challenges feel like a cakewalk in comparison. And because you typically only have a few laps to overtake the whole pack starting near the back since there's no qualifying, I feel like what it does is encourage dirty driving. Like, I don't care how much it costs to fix the damages as long as I win the race. Now, I personally don't like driving this way as a sim racer, but if the difficulty increases like that, I feel like I have no other choice. Maybe this is why the flashback/rewind system returns from the predecessor, to compensate and give you as many attempts at a certain corner as you want. But is that all you want to do? Rewind nearly every corner in a few laps of a race because you're so determined to win? That doesn't sound fun nor satisfying. Okay, I'm not saying I'm resorting to this 100% of the time. Sometimes it also comes down to the car not being as powerful as the opponents, and I can understand the game trying to make sure you don't win 100% of the time, or at least the game wants you to earn every single one of those wins. It's just frustrating on occasion. Like, there'll be times where a proper challenge is inevitable, which is more of a good thing than a bad thing, depending on how much you value challenge in a video game. Maybe I'm just annoyed they broke the status quo. Me wanting to drive as many different events as possible for this review, but I have a few certain races where they hold me back. It's still a video game at the end of the day, and it doesn't deter too much from the overall package. But is its real name Forza Motorsport 3.5? Would it have been worth buying in 2011 if you already had Forza Motorsport 3? Because as I said before, it's hard to make a full sequel in such a quick amount of time like that. Well, according to the critic scores that year, the answer was clearly yes. Now, I love Forza Motorsport 4 for the same reasons I love the predecessors, just refined and even more of it. More cars all designed for the console in mind with their own interior views, more tracks, event types, the brilliant Auto Vista mode, extra attention to detail on the sound, driving mechanics, and despite the AI adjustment system, highly accessible for people who have never played a sim racer before. It's just something that everyone can enjoy in their own unique way. I love that.
Monstrously fast and loud when you drove like you'd sat on a bee, yet relaxed and easy to live with when you didn't.
Look at it like this. If you had to pick 1, 2, 3 simulation racing games to recommend to someone who isn't a fan of the genre, Forza Motorsport 4 is one of the first that come to mind. And we're in another decade where all the Forza games from that era are cheap now. So yes, I would absolutely recommend Forza 4 even if you already have the third one. And had I played this when it was new instead of putting a lot of hours into Gran Turismo 5 back in the early 2010s, I would have bought an Xbox 360 then and there. Now obviously commercially, GT5 was the runaway train. However, when you combine the sales of the first Forza games with Gran Turismo 4 and 5, okay, it's still a runaway train, but that is still a very impressive number. And even just a year later, they released another Forza title to expand their franchise into another direction. But as for Forza Motorsport 4, this was the one that sealed the franchise as one of the best of the genre. It is indeed peak Forza. It's ambitious, but not rubbish in any way. A masterpiece of the Xbox 360, and it belongs in any racing fans and/or 360 collection.